Yeah. I didn't go to share screen, so I don't know whether Brandon is thinking. So I'm going to go. I have a couple of PowerPoint slides. I have never managed a roundtable before, so apologies in advance if I make a bit of a donkey's bum of it. I have a couple of occasions to try and weave kind of collect one option. I can use a couple of breakout groups, but if the number stays relatively small, we have 12 at the moment. When I'm kind of open to as free form a discussion as I'd want to be. So again, if people want to unmute and stop me in full stream or take issue with me in a way, so I think a couple of slides. I'll kind of give an intro, and then I'm going to come back to you in a kind of a collective way. So I'll just go to share screen. Where am I going? Okay, so hopefully you can see. Are we thumbs up? Okay, so in a sense, the story so far. So where I've come at this from, rather late in my career, I decided to undertake a postgraduate diploma in university teaching here in the university. So it was a free course offered to faculty, and a kind of a 2-year diploma, part-time diploma. And one of the modules was about module design, and we were kind of encouraged to think free and think easy, and just say, well, if you had a course you would like to deliver to your students, whatever it is, what would it be? And kind of building on the material that we had been going through in terms of problem-based learning, threshold concepts, you name it, we were to kind of weave in this theory, conceptually ground the module, but then, you know, make it as practical as possible. And around the same time, I had been reading this book, which I'll refer to later on about the Theranos scandal, a book called Bad Blood, the secrets and lies in a Silicon Valley startup, and the lovely story of Elizabeth Holmes. And between these different vectors, I decided, let's go for a dark side module, because as I said earlier, it was something that I was picking at, weaving in as a little kind of a subtext or a little afterthought at the end of topics on personality, you know, weaving into a little bit on leadership, weaving in issues like kind of neurotic cultures when I'm looking at organizational culture and corporate culture. So something that I was kind of persistently drawn on, but never in a systematic manner in a way. So then I stumbled on one of my colleagues recommended MOTS, and I was kind of debating, like I had a paper, so I actually had a paper, a fairly well developed paper, but there was problems with it. So I kind of debated would I present a paper versus a round table. So the round table won in a sense that the more I've looked at this, the more I realize that my paper and my current thinking on it is quite constrained and quite focused. So part of my aspiration from this session in a way is to challenge my thinking in a loose aim way. And then ultimately, my aim is hopefully next year, I'd like to deliver the module, ideally to a kind of a post-experience cohort, MBA, or we have a big MSc program here, and then hopefully try and publish something on it, because there doesn't seem to be a lot written particularly from either from a teaching point of view, or I know there is quite an output later on. So the kind of backdrop, as you can see from the visuals, is that, you know, the business world seems to be a really continually horrible place. And why is that? I mean, there's such horrible stuff going on today, and kind of part of the solution seems to be kind of built around positive organizational psychology and ethics. And the idea is, if we're just positive and we're ethical, all these problems will disappear. And my view is, no, they won't, and it's not good enough. And to that end, again, I'm going to come back to you now shortly. I'm drawing inspiration from Harry Potter. So if you have any Harry Potter fans in the audience, in a sense, I was kind of really intrigued with the idea that one of their core educational programs was a defense against the dark arts. That the idea was that the kind of good and bad, you know, there's a Star Wars analogy there as well, inevitably, in a way, that the dark is there, the dark will always be with us, and it's very clever and it's very insidious. And if you don't really understand it very well, then either you get seductively drawn into it, or you get trampled in it in a very, very nasty way. So kind of that was my kind of core issue with the program I was pursuing. If I was to design such a course, what would I put in it? Like, I know the students would love it. And then again, we'll come back to some of the risks associated with this approach at the very end of the talk today. Like, is there a danger of valorizing this thing? Because particularly, I know some of the people on my MBA programs over the year, I mean, they actually delight in having some of these dark traits. They see it as a kind of prerequisite of being a very successful business manager in a way. So that's the kind of the scene in a way. And then, so the plan, my brief plan, we've got 9 minutes done in the 50 minutes left to us. So I've kind of the structure I would like to follow. So issue number one is just from a philosophical point of view, how would we set about explaining bad or evil? So kind of let's step back from this. And again, lots of publications, books, looking at the dark side, but not an awful lot beyond the kind of I suppose there's an ethical angle associated with it a little bit. So that was the kind of first thing I'd like to throw open for debate. The second issue then is, let's park the philosophy a little bit, and let's look at this as a scientific challenge or an aspect of modernity. And from that point of view, from a scientific perspective, what are the kind of options in terms of structuring and analyzing the dark side? So as a kind of a scientific occurrence from that point of view. And then within that, trying to weave in ideas as to what might be included in such a dedicated module, or even, I mean, I'm open to the idea that a dedicated module is a bad idea. That maybe we should be weaving in a dark side to everything that we do, and that's a more systematic way. But I'm kind of pushing the idea of a dedicated module, and then the issue is, how would we structure it, and then how would it best be delivered? And I suppose linked into that, how am I going to assess this thing? I haven't got around to the idea of assessing. Issue 3 is, again, I thrown it open, and I have a proposal here in the sense that to act as kind of a repository. So I'm open to the idea that there's a follow-on out of this session, and I'm happy to share the module outline I have. But equally, if people have thoughts, suggestions in terms of core readings, case studies, etc., experiential exercises, I'd be very happy to collate them and distribute across the group. And again, my email address is later on in one of the slides. And equally, I'm happy to share these slides. And then we finish off kind of as, is there a problem here? Is there a risk from an ethical point of view, from a duty of care point of view, from let's say this danger of potentially valorizing and actually encouraging this type of behavior within students that quite frequently I find don't have a moral compass and don't see the need for a moral compass in terms of doing business. Okay, so before we start, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm just wondering, in terms of our audience here, have we got any examples of good practice at the moment? Anybody doing this stuff already in a fairly decent manner or a systematic manner? Throw it open.
Well, if I could ask, not necessarily doing it, but this has been something I've been grappling with as an educator, is how much, we teach the idea that we should be the Jedi, to use your analogy, the good, and yet we should be helping organizations be effective and efficient. And those are not necessarily the same thing. And as I think about my career, and I've kind of dabbled in administration, now I'm back to faculty, much like with politics or business, if you're going to be good, do you have to get off the treadmill at some point? Like, can you be an executive, a president, senator, whatever, if you're going to practice good? And it's something I've been struggling with because I don't know the answer to that. But my experience with managers and businesses and executives over the years is that you kind of have to be a little bad if you're going to be successful, if that's the path you want. So just throwing it out there.
I'll just make a quick comment on that. I mean, my angle here is back to the kind of Harry Potter analogy. That, like, I do believe managers should be good. Okay, they should behave with a strong moral compass. But back to your point, Craig, like, if you're a good guy, a good woman, good person, you're going to get walked over in most public and private sector organizations because they're not particularly nice places, and there's no indication that they're getting any nicer. So from that point of view, back to the kind of Harry Potter thing, I think we need to arm ourselves. We need to arm our students with an understanding as to what's going on here. And then I can interact and try and cope with and manage and hopefully ameliorate without being that dirty Machiavellian person in a sense. So that'd be, anyway, that's my quick thought. But happy, anybody else have a view on it? do we have to be bad? So I'm is that your question, Craig? Kind of, do we need to be bad to be effective in the contemporary business world?
I'm worried that we might have to be a little bad.
Any takers?
I just think sometimes it's a choice between 2 decisions or 5 decisions that would have negative outcomes for a different group of people. So depending upon the choice that you make, some group is going to be disadvantaged. And so in that case, no matter what decision you make, it could be considered going into the dark side, depending upon the perspective of those who are affected.
Yeah, thanks for that, Deborah. Now I'm going to qualify that a little bit, but I'm going to say we want to tie it. Well, there's winners and losers in every kind of interaction, and it's certainly not what I'm proposing to get at. I'm more interested in this stuff that is inherently bad, manipulative. Maybe I'll roll on. Have you any last quick comment on that one? And again, so I want to do is kind of roll on and look at what am I talking about here? So how do we tie it down as a at least put some kind of a limit to what we mean by the dark side? Okay, so
I agreed with what Craig said, though. I think that a manager can operate with very good intentions, but yet face certain circumstances where they do have to do something that goes against or feels like it goes against their moral code. And sometimes those things seem necessary. And so that's the dilemma.
Yeah, but again, if I know I'm taking the high ground on this one, in the sense, if you roll back to the visuals, I mean, a lot of the behaviors and the corporate scandals that we see go far and above, kind of necessary action, expedient behavior. This is just horribly malicious, damaging behavior. And I suppose it's that layer. Again, how one differentiates one from the stuff we're talking about here is going to be a little bit of a challenge. And maybe approaching it from a definitional point of view might help. So I'll just roll on and throw up my definitional stuff. Where am I gone again? PowerPoint. Okay, so maybe I'll come back on this one. So we just go on one further. And have I lost it? No. Where's my definition? Sorry. The dark side label. So sorry, I have it here. And this is from the Griffin O'Leary Kelly, again, a book I'll bring in a little bit more. And they approach this thing from it's a very good text in a way. So this is what I'm kind of trying to bring it down to. So people hurt, carry out injustices, wealth, power, revenge. Okay, so again, it's, as we're saying here, range of labels being used in the OB, work psychology, work sociology space. It's workplace deviance, counterproductive, insidious workplace behavior, unethical behavior, misbehavior. And again, the twist in the tail here, in a sense, is that, say, from a critical management studies point of view, some of this stuff might be seen as good. This is the manager, the worker, fighting back against a system that's really corrupt and crappy. I'm kind of proposing to take out illegal behavior out of my pot, in a sense, because it's, if it's illegal, end of story. And again, I suppose the problem there is different jurisdictions regard different types of behavior illegally in a way. So I'm trying to, it's not, so the issue here is not just about being expedient. It's something else. It's something deeper. Okay, and then the question is, well, if it's something deeper, how do we put some kind of a platform around it, in a sense? So we've kind of asked the question, and to be honest, I think most of us have scratched with this. We've looked at the manifestations of it and we've looked at corporate failures, etc., etc., etc. But speaking personally, I've always been very dissatisfied in the sense as to that I introduce these things and then I kind of leave them hanging. And then I certainly don't link them up in terms of my individual behavior, how that can develop into dysfunctional team behavior, and in turn, how that gets manifested through horrible toxic emotions and links in then to nasty corporate cultures and punishing structures, etc. So and this is my conundrum to some degree. Okay, so we want to kind of step back from the immediacy of the issue. And again, I have another question we want to throw out. So this problem of explaining bad or evil. Any thoughts? So again, I've looked at this from, and I have a particular view on it, which I will introduce later on. But philosophically, how would one introduce the idea of bad and evil? Any thoughts on to the student? What would you do?
Would it be something kind of like Mark and Deborah kind of alluded to, that you start making these decisions and maybe start moving towards the dark side, so to speak, and rationalizing those. And then the farther you go, the easier it is to make those decisions, the easier it is to rationalize. And so it becomes a continuing process. My hopeful sense is people don't mean to do evil from the start, but over time they feel sort of obligated that, oh, I have a bigger picture, my career, my organization, so I'm justifying or rationalizing the decisions. And the more you do that, the easier it is to spiral. I mean, that's sort of my thought on it.
Yeah. I don't think a Marxian perspective would be clearly one. So again, is particularly in terms of some of the labels like misbehavior and corporate deviance, etc. So I mean, and my sense is, like, before we start delving into our bread and butter, I think a context needs to be set for the student. You know, we're talking about this some of our more modernist kind of psychology would say, well, it's a kind of a personality dysfunction. Like, and is that so? Again, the challenge would be, how do we make this picture more complicated, more philosophically informed? So we've Marx, we can put him into the pot and stir it up a little bit. But then the risk there is, it's socialism. That's kind of not nice stuff, and really, it doesn't really have any part to play in a kind of an open, capitalistic type of a work environment. And we might see it in some societies, but problem there. Other thoughts? How could we frame the issue of being, of bad, of evil? If Paul, I put it,
Paul, I was going to jump. You know, business environments are political arenas, and so similar to your experiences with MBA students, you know, all's fair in politics, and so it becomes very difficult to define truly evil actions when you start to put that political lens on. Hey, you know, this is a war I have to win.
Yeah. I think it's Rosabeth Moskanter talks about the, you know, politics being the last great organizational dirty secret in a paper she wrote many moons ago in a way. And again, I think the politics angle is a good one, and it kind of links back to the Marxian one to an extent, in a sense. It is looking at things from a political perspective. That's good. So two connected ones. But again, I'm trying to hold off getting sucked into the bread and butter and say, well, can we leave our students with hopefully an open and pluralist kind of framework to grapple with? And again, I've some suggestions here, some of which may or may not be too popular in a way. Any other quick thoughts?
Yeah, Paul, what's to be gained by anchoring on the label of evil as a character flaw, as a moral failing in, I guess, the sense of a philosophical, the use of the word in philosophy and perhaps even theology. But yeah, I'm looking in the chat and hearing what people are saying, and from my perspective, when I teach the ethics course or a leadership course or even an OB course, I guess I don't really care a lot about making an assumption or coming to a conclusion about someone's moral character. I have to manage their behavior. And so there are lots of ways into that, I think. And we have, I'll call out Mark a little bit here. Jackaloni and Promislo, broken when entering. And I think that they're in AMLE. What's powerful, I think, about that article is that it doesn't start, like this type of behavior doesn't start when people get into organizations. There's a powerful group norming that goes on in business schools and other schools, but mostly business schools, where to value things outside of power and control and wealth, and the bottom line is to be regarded with suspicion. There's a huge in-group norming process that happens and that perpetuates. And I'm conscious of describing the article with one of the authors in the room right now, but I think that it doesn't matter in a lot of ways if someone has an evil character or a sociopathic character. When you look at impact and you look at birds of a feather and how those things get perpetuated. And so I'm wondering, what do we gain when we talk with students about evil when you're trying to get a way into this conversation?
Well, I'll just add to that a little bit, Kathy, but thank you for citing our article there. Yes, absolutely. Another thing we argued in that paper is that it actually begins before business school. I mean, students come to us with all kinds of preconceived notions that have nothing to do with college and what they encounter in our schools. It's from the culture that keeps reinforcing materialistic values and a lot of things that are reinforced in business school. But I agree, to call it evil, I guess I'm with Kathy. I would prefer to delve into why do good people do bad things rather than kind of characterizing them as evil people with these horrible characters, because I don't like to think of our students like that. And I think more often than not, it's these good people, basically good people, who are pulled into very unethical actions.
Now
There are for sure some bottom feeders, like for sure, like Fastow was a bottom feeder. There's nothing we can do with him. But I think it's a bell curve. I think that those people are not our students generally. And, you know, again, I worry about that label a little bit. And for me, it doesn't really help me get into that conversation about what they need to look out for in organizational settings.
Now, I will explain why. So again, given the way I started this particular project, this idea of a grounding philosophy kind of helped me in a way. And the idea would be that, like, particularly say from a positive point of view, is this something that, is it a deficiency or is it something that is there? And I guess kind of back to Mark's point, like, is somebody, so we're going to very briefly talk about the Theranos case. And I know in the book, like your man Theranos, he talks about the idea that he didn't think Elizabeth Holmes was necessarily a bad individual, but clearly some of the behaviors that she exhibited became really bad. So how do you explain that transition in a way? So when I'll offer my view on it, and then we'll kind of move on. So I just very quickly go back to screen share and kind of explain the issue that I was trying to get across here. So I'll go share. So the problem of evil. Sorry, my mouse is not working very well. So kind of one angle, and I think this just as a start point. So like my thinking here was as a start point of the course. How does one explain the presence of evil or the presence of badness? And again, it's kind of like a theological perspective in a way. And there's a famous book by John Hick, Soul Making Theocracy. And he talks about these two, this kind of pluralist perspective. He talks about the Augustinian approach, which sees as this evil as this deprivation of good. So it's something that we have a bad copy, but it can be improved. And this comes back to positive organizational psychology, ethical training, etc. That with time, that there's just an imperfection in the system, but the imperfection can be designed out of the system. The Iranian approach then is saying that it's not buying into that at all. It's saying that evil is a natural and necessary feature of life. It is built into the fabric of the universe in a sense. And it becomes an opportunity. So it's an opportunity to grow and learn, and without it, then. So you've got these kind of two alternative perspectives. But again, the idea is, well, they're kind of very Christian-y, a Christian-centric type of view. And then, so the bit that I was particularly interested in is in Taoism, not so much as a philosophy. Bad, and Taoism would have an explanation of that, in a sense that in one, you know, back to the yin and yang, in one is the presence of the other, and they will manifest themselves. So Elizabeth Holmes again had all these beautifully classical features and attributes that we would valorize in the business school of charisma, etc., 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 and they went bad. And the well, we're shocked and dismayed by that in a way. And kind of a yin and yang perspective would say, well, yeah, this is life. And to some extent, we need to anticipate this. And then there's a whole range of other religious perspectives on it that do explain. So I think it'll be, again, the risk is here it turns into a course on theology to some degree, and Eastern and Western theology. But I think it really poses a really interesting issue is, like, is this badness? I know evil is a very loaded value judgment term, but is it something that is always there, or is it something that we just let creep into the design? And I think that question does need to be answered. Sorry, we'll come back at that at the very end, maybe again. So kind of one angle, and the bit that I was working on in the paper was a kind of a Taoist perspective. That the darkness is in the bright, and it's a cyclical process, and they will move and develop, and the challenge for managers and the challenges for organizations is keeping these countervailing forces in balance. So it is about paradox, you know, bittersweet, light and day. They're there, and they will, you know, we're not going to get rid of them, but we need to understand them, you know, and these perspectives, these philosophies may help us get a bit of a better handle on it. Okay, so then I said, well, let's bring it down a level in a way. And from my point of view, and it's crept into some of the recommendations in terms of readings and comments in a way, that we're dealing with something that from our disciplinary point of view, at least, is multidisciplinary and involves multiple levels of frames and perspectives. So we got a bit of there's a challenge there, but there's also great opportunity in a way, that how could I get across this? So we can make it overly complicated, or we could make it kind of fairly simple. And I did a quick jot of how many disciplines, kind of management related disciplines, and I think I got up to about 14. Okay, so I'm trying to say how it, and these would be areas of research on the kind of trawl of the literature that would have something to say about this particular issue. And I can just say, you hit an MBA student with 14 different angle I thought would be kind of interesting, and my internet connection's wobbly, was to come at this from a problem-based learning perspective. So rather than giving the students an a priori framework, let's look at a challenge in a sense. And I say the interesting one here, to me at least at the time, but I'd imagine that again we can catch them in the chat, you know, alternative cases. So this Theranos case, and I had to ask Brandon as to whether I could make the viewing of the YouTube or the HBO documentary compulsory before attending the session in a sense, but I'm kind of going to assume most people are relatively familiar with the case. There is a huge and really interesting set of teaching resources built in around it. And I know there's a recent case study published on it as well, which you've got the HBO documentary, which is fascinating. You've got a number of fairly detailed YouTube videos, a couple of books, and I'd imagine, I haven't seen any business, so journal articles on it as yet. But my thoughts were, you know, having hit the students with a bit of theology in a way, let's bring it down to basics, prep them up, problem-based learning, and what went wrong? Okay, it's kind of like to Craig's point, or wherever he was, that you've got this really charismatic, visionary, intelligent, clever woman, and really brings the world of mess down upon herself. And I know the court cases are still impending. I think there's wire fraud cases, etc. The company's gone, massive losses, etc., 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 etc. So from the idea would be hit the students with it and say, well, what went wrong? Why did this go so bad? Thoughts. Hang on, I'm putting you on the spot now. What went wrong? What was it about the Theranos case? What are the students likely to come up with? And the idea here in a way is to use a problem-based learning approach to put a structure on the course to be subsequently explored. So if I'm putting you into my student mode, and I'm assuming we are familiar enough with the case, are we? People, what went wrong? How would you explain what went wrong here? And maybe I could use I'll jot down some thoughts on it in a way. Why? How would you explain? What lenses would you use? Go around the house a few times. What would you say was the fundamental problem here with Theranos?
What caused her to act?
No, I think I don't want to personalize it in a sense. I think she's a component in the picture, but here we have an outcome that is inherently bad. I mean, okay, it was a failure. Maybe failure is inevitable, but again, the underlying issues here. This is not a good story. This is a story of a corporate scandal. So in some ways, it personifies a lot of what can go wrong and will go wrong, or may inevitably go wrong. So where do you start? Where would you start? Sorry, Mark, I say let's pick her. Okay, let's pick Elizabeth Holmes, this charismatic, wonderful person who seems to have put her image in the Steve Jobs variety.
Right, right.
How would you analyze her impact and role in the process?
Well, I think that's the thing. So I think there's perhaps a choice to make here in the discussion of when we look at these kinds of behaviors, are we going to focus on the individual actor and where she went wrong, some of the choices that she made, or at the broader picture, which I think you seem to be supporting, looking at why do these types of things happen? Not in this particular case, but part of it is the focus on the bottom line and the language that's used to reinforce all the values that people learn in business schools with bottom line thinking and people as resources and not as human beings. And so I think that all contributes to what happened at this company and probably a lot of others too.
So how would you label that? Is it a societal? It is a societal level issue, really, isn't it?
It is because it's reinforced by, as I say, I don't think not just business school, but the world, our society, and our culture, our TV shows, our movies. All of it is reflecting the values that really prioritize money and possessions and at the cost of other values.
So, I mean, I'll just go back to share, sorry. I'll go back to share screen just as a kind of a discussion point more than anything else. So when I'd kind of gone through, having looked at the documentaries, etc. Sorry, I've lost it again. I was gonna, so, and again, this is back to the idea, can I use a case study to effectively structure the course? And then use it as a kind of a diagnostic frame, and then that in turn will advise and structure the kind of subsequent course. So Mark, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think your input was back to the societal institutional level. And again, the kind of material, the source material would be hypercritical of the kind of Silicon Valley culture, which is driven by one of greed. I mean, it is a greed culture with an enormous risk appetite. So they talk about FOMO, fear of missing out, and a naivety, you know, in a sense that's with big risk comes big gain, the risk appetite. And then, you know, it really is investor blindness. So again, there's a societal level. And again, Craig, I think Marx would have something to say about that to some extent as a kind of a central issue. But I think it's back to the, where do we start? We could start at the macro and build it down to the micro, or we could start with the micro and build it up to the macro. So again, my view is try and let the students set the tone and structure of the program to follow. And then these issues, hopefully they're teased out in terms of a detailed case analysis. And then in turn, the module can then be built around and dig into and deepen into these various levels. And then try and figure out their interaction, because clearly it's not just one issue, you know, it's not just one individual. It's one individual. Again, I think it's John Carreyrou, so he has the bad blood. He calls it, he kind of classifies Elizabeth Holmes as a sociopath, you know, in a sense, a delusional sociopath. And he says, didn't think she was lying at the start of the process, like her vision was real. So again, a lot of these wonderful attributes, very charismatic, very persuasive, great team skills, etc. And then it just all, she gets sucked into a bigger dynamic and it all goes to pot. So I get evidence of clear dishonesty and lying, delusional behavior, in a sense, delusional associated with the vision, and its subsequent multiple manifestations as the machine itself became initially bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it became smaller and smaller and smaller. Narcissism, you've got your sociopathy, you have your I can't remember what the other two are. My brain has gone a bit fried in a way. So there's that kind of interesting individual level which psychology tends to address fairly well. I know one of the comments talked about the team element here, and clearly in this case, you know, the associated senior management team were partly to blame in this case, and that's filtered down then to what we're an incredibly bright and very clever workforce, and then in the sense this kind of groupthink kicks in, massive levels of conformity. There's no dissent again, and then where you did speak up, you were sacked. And you know, we have to pay homage to the whistleblowers in a sense who came forward to at great personal risk, kind of, and then this absence of cross-team dialogue. So the kind of team design with none of the teams, it was a secrecy, again, couched in terms of intellectual property and knowledge management, etc. So you've got individuals with strange motivations operating in a team environment which tolerates a lot of this misbehavior. Put it into an organizational setting where you have lousy governance, you know, what is, back to Ketz de Vries, he talks about the neurotic culture, you know, where secrets rule the roost. There's a climate of fear. Everybody's afraid of losing their job. And yet there seems to be this wonderful belief that they can pull it off because the level of intelligence is there. And then things go wrong and things go really, really bad. And I suppose Theranos is interesting in the sense that it was relatively small scale. So I don't know how many 150 people lost their jobs. I don't know what the final bill has been. I think it was something like $16 billion or something lost for investors. So, I meant to look up the final figures. And the legals are still rolling out on that one. So again,
Paul, a question on this case, because what this does is it sort of sets the narrative of bad behavior leading to bad results, which is great, because you can bring your students through that. How do you defend against this as an organization? But it has a particular perspective. If for a more nuanced, though, what about cases where it didn't blow up? Where the organization was actually survived or largely successful, and yet these behaviors continue to be part of the culture. And I guess that's sort of, for me, sort of that interesting is, yes, this is easy. Yeah. This is like an Enron, it blew up. So see, bad behavior leads to bad results. But what about when bad behavior doesn't necessarily lead to bad results? And how do we help students sort of navigate that more nuanced understanding?
Could you think of an example? Could you give us a case in point? And I know I'm with you on the idea that we're surrounded by this, and everybody will dabble in it to a limited extent. And these extreme cases maybe are great for illustrating the big picture, but then lose the nuance.
I mean, just personal examples of organizations, leaders I've met with, administrators I've met with, who, quite frankly, I think continue to perpetuate bad behaviors and yet continue to move up the chain, and continue to do well in the sense of their career aspirations, but not necessarily well in the sense of having a strong moral compass.
Yeah, well, I don't have an easy answer to that in a sense, but I suppose my own approach would be, can we not tackle and analyze and I suppose a kind of a post-mortem of the really bad cases? And if we can understand the really bad cases, potentially we can see how these things snowball, and is there potential to see the early warning signs? Is there potential to try and intervene? Now, clearly, the system will tolerate, and maybe this is back to the idea that, you know, they're back to the kind of philosophical question: is evil inherently built into everything? That it is there, and maybe that's the story. You know, bad things are going to happen in the organization. Suck it up, because it's the nature of the beast. And if you want to survive in this environment, you need to learn a few of these little nasty tricks, which personally I find a little bit depressing as a view, in a way. Like I would hope that there could be a more positive approach to it. And again, I'll bring it back to yin and yang. It's there that in its excess, the positive will breed the negative, and that's why I thought with the kind of the Elizabeth Holmes case, you know, and looking at her, and I know she's an easy target in this case, but she has so many of these positive attributes that we drill into our students, and yet in the right environment, these things seem to then manifest themselves. The negative side inevitably comes out. So it will come out if the checks aren't in place, and then to fairly catastrophic consequences, which is kind of back to my initial visual. And you know, we're never going to get rid of it all, but wouldn't it be great if we could stop some of the big stuff, you know, because the impact is relatively well. And this is why I'm kind of drawn back to the yin and yang, without being buying into kind of Eastern religion in a sense. I just think it presents an issue there. And back to this, if we can teach our students, raise the level of awareness about these factors, and earlier. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm hogging the debate. Anybody else want to chip in, make a view on Craig's point?
Well, I think there's no question that there are certainly a lot of cases where unethical behavior leads to positive outcomes for the people that are committing it, and in certain environments. And yeah, absolutely, people who are willing to take credit for things that they have no business taking credit for, but they get away with it. people, there are all kinds of things that happen. But I do like the way that you broke down the contributory factors in this case with Theranos, because I do think that there were a lot of factors that went into what happened here, and probably if one of these had been shored up, if the culture had been better, if there had been better governance, maybe a lot of these problems could have been avoided.
Yeah. Potentially.
Potentially.
Yeah. And like the legals, my sense of the case at the moment is the only illegal behavior, like the case against Holmes and her partner was wire fraud, that they had communicated test results to institutions and to individuals which they knowingly knew were wrong. I mean, that seems to be the only legal issue of illegal behavior associated with what was going on here. Now, I think some of the investors are taking cases against her as well in a way. And some of the regulatory bodies have made decisions on it. The bit that I don't know how it fits in is, and Kathy, this is back to our discussion at the start of the thing, where does leadership fit into this? You know, is leadership something that pervades the entire process? Is it an individual level issue? So like, again, I could say, well, Elizabeth Holmes has manifestations of a Machiavellian leadership style, you know, and her partner more so potentially. So manipulative, self-interested, and then ultimately delusional, and then bring in a lot of dishonesty and lying, et cetera, et cetera. So the leadership thing, I think, is fairly central, and yet I'm not quite clear, is it an organizational level construct? Is it a wider construct or not? Anybody, any quick thoughts on that one? So again, the idea is, well, our checks and balances should be from the leadership. People will copy, emulate. Don't know. Kathy, can I put you on the spot on that one? Where would you put leadership in my?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to watch what was going on in chat and hearing about the conversation. My bias based not only in my experience, I was in the private sector for a fair amount of time before coming back for a PhD, is firmly in Mark's camp. And then I also put in the chat an article from Dennis Moberg talking about being smart and politically astute about raising ethical issues when you see bad things happening in an organization. Mm-hmm. I think that the unit of analysis is culture, whether it's societal, whether it's organizational. To your question about, do we have organization? Well, actually it was Craig. Are there organizations where this bad behavior is perpetuated and celebrated? And you can pick anyone on Wall Street, any of them. And that type of behavior is absolutely celebrated and rewarded. And those organizations are thriving. And so I think that it's too much for a single person. I think that the leadership construct in a very traditional sense is too atomistic to be effective. And I think that it sets our students up for thinking, if only I'm just more stalwart in the face of this temptation, if only I could stand up to my board of directors or my immediate supervisor and just be more ethical, then it would be okay. And I think that sets them up for failure because they're swimming upstream. And so my unit of analysis is leadership is within a context which exerts enormous power.
And again, I think the evidence of the consequences for whistleblowers is quite frightening, in a sense that therein lies dismay and peril and financial ruin for the whistleblower who you know, tries to lift the lid on some of these issues in a way.
I think to Kathy's point, oh, go ahead, Kathy, sorry.
So this is Deborah, actually.
Oh, sorry, Deborah.
Since Kathy brought up culture, and I admittedly am a bit biased as well, but I will share with you a bit of inside information from a cultural perspective as an African American woman, in that the discussions within my community about Theranos is, well, the common comment has been, can you believe what a good-looking white woman can get away with if she just bats her eyes at men with money? And that is when you watch the movie, the reaction has been, can you envision a Black woman getting away with something like that, or any person of color? So just to, again, add my own bias and a different cultural perspective, that is another perspective to consider with that case.
Yeah. And so could you put it, I like labels, Deborah, I think it's a lovely point. Could you, back to the, say, if there's 4 levels, as I've at least kind of tried to analyze the case, where would that point lie? Is that a societal issue again? If it's culture, is it societal culture or organizational culture, or a mix of both?
Oh, I think it's definitely a mix of both. It's a societal level in the society's perception of beauty. It is an organizational level because of how traditionally people are perceived and evaluated and rewarded within an organization and within groups. And I think from the, I guess, the individual investor's perspective, the individual level, in response to her, that the interchanges that she had, and on the individual level, which gave her greater credibility on the broader levels, I think is what contributed to her outstanding success. Does that sound reasonable, fair?
I'll have to let that one sink in. No, I think it's a lovely point, and a different point. That
I'm sharing inside cultural information.
So I'm just conscious that we've 5 minutes left, and I suppose one of my points, at least in a sense, back to how to address this issue, is that if we're buying into the idea that there are multiple levels and multiple perspectives, that my view is we just can't do justice to the complexity and the interplay of these levels, tagging these things on as aspects of an OB module. That, which is what I have been doing, I know, over the years, that I'll bring in a little bit and throw in a little bit of this and a little. I don't have a solution. I mean, back to the kind of issue of balance, like for balance to be achieved, back to Harry Potter, in a sense, if you want to be a good wizard, you need to know what bad wizards do. And ideally you don't become a bad wizard, but some good wizards will become bad wizards, and that's more back to personal values, etc. So I think I think as educators we do have a view to push the positive and the ethical behavior, but I think there's an onus on us to try and better explain why the bad stuff happens and how the bad stuff happens, and as we've talked about here, how the bad stuff is valorized, because if they get away with it, they become heroes, and they're on the Hall of Fame. So the other option I had, and this is back to the Griffin O'Leary Kelly book, I mean, it could look at this issue from the point of view of outcomes. So rather than looking at levels, individual, group, organizational, you could look at specific manifestations. So that book in particular has, it looks at the causes and consequences of specific outcomes or specific types of behaviors, why they happen and how they could be avoided. So that would be another approach. So I'd look at discrimination, I would look at lying, I would look at cheating as a way of addressing this thing in a more systematic manner. And it's the systematic thing, I think, that's bugging me at the end of the day. I'm not sure. I see the need for it, but I'm not sure how to do it. So I'll leave that one hang there in a way. So the resources, I mean, I know the chat is full of it, and again, equally, I'm very happy to act as a kind of a resource thing. If people want to drop me an email, I assume I can get access to the thing, and what I will try and do is I'll put together some of the material. So in a sense, if people have thoughts, ideas in terms of case studies, real or published scales or inventories, and again, I have a fairly detailed outline, and I'm happy to share that. But any other thoughts, suggestions, etc., building on what's the very valuable material that's in the chat line there, I am very happy to collate and circulate if that is of any benefit or interest to people in a way. So my concluding point, I think I have a minute to go, and this has come up already. Is there a risk here? So I put together my sexy dark side module. I have lots of Harry Potter and Star Wars, and I get a 50, 60 students that are dying type individuals in a way. So I suppose a concern I would have is there a risk of when you give it so much attention, is there a risk of valorizing it? I think the yin and yang thing for me, at least, is causing the issue of paradox. So how do you get across, like, it is about paradox, two things operating simultaneously and interacting with each other in a way, and how I think the risk there is you're going to lose 90% of the class potentially. And then the only other thing that's coming up, it's in the back of my head, is that some kind of ethical considerations, I think. So some of the tests are kind of quasi-diagnostic tests to some degree. Is there a duty of care? I don't know. Anyway, can I leave that one hang there, or does anybody want to throw in, is this a good idea? Is the idea of a systematic, comprehensive dark side module a good idea, or could it be a bad idea? Any takers on that one?
I think it's a good idea, Paul, but I also think that you'd have a lot of people seeing it as being a negative. We can't do this. That's not what business is supposed to be about. That the dark side is the dark side because people ignore it and then deliberately ignore it and then tell you that you're bad by naming it.
Yeah. But I could see that, but I think increasingly they don't ignore it. They nearly embrace it. When I had an MSc student last year that we did a Machiavellian course, and he glowed in this horrifically high Machiavellian score, and he openly shared the result, and his view was, that is what's necessary to get the job done. In this case, I was teaching project management. Project managers have to do hard things and difficult things, and he will do whatever it takes to get the job done, in a sense. And so the moral compass.
May mean he never looks at the actual outcomes of the job that he's doing.
My sense is the outcome is project delivery, and the project will be delivered at all cost. Okay, and that's what he's being paid for. So. And I've kind of got manifestations of this, particularly from an MBA audience, in a sense that they are guns for hire. They will do whatever it takes to get the job done. And there was a comment, one of the comments in the chat thing was, the students are depressed coming out of my discussion of this thing. And I do, it is kind of depressing. Like, do we throw our hat at it? Or because I don't think the fix is, I just don't see it happening.
Sorry, Paul, you froze. You don't see what happening?
I don't see the badness disappearing by us teaching more ethical behavior to our students.
No, absolutely not.
Definitely not.
So what's plan B? I'm suggesting, I suppose, plan B is a dedicated module where people kind of openly and honestly debate these issues. But the risk is the debate is a moot one because they don't care. They don't see a problem. like the problem with Elizabeth Holmes is that she got caught, you know, in a sense, and she didn't have stash away enough money to make it all worthwhile at the end of the day, maybe. No, I don't. I'm guessing at that, you know.
Well, I do think there's a lot of value in discussing this, and I like the idea of a dedicated module, because I agree, if you don't dedicate some time to really exploring this issue, it's probably not going to get a lot of attention. I guess I kind of come back to where, yes, I want to discuss it, but I want to give the students some hope also that they can be aware of these realities. Yes, these things happen in organizations, but what can they do to still act ethically and not be susceptible, perhaps, to some of the things that happened with Elizabeth. So try to keep it a little more positive, even though you're talking about very negative things.
Yeah, but I think sorry.
No, I was just going to add, I think it's also about giving the students an understanding of that they're making choices all the time, and that it can be helpful for them to look just a bit further ahead. So for the project, that project manager, getting the job done at all costs may well mean an absolute disaster for himself, for the business, for anything else, at a point beyond. I mean, to me, that's Enron. They were getting the job done at all costs, and it just, all it led was all of them over a cliff. And I don't know as much about Elizabeth Holmes. I hadn't looked at her at all. But
it's lovely. It's a good case. But I suppose from my own point of view, I think my own thinking is that we can't design it out. It's there. I mean, and this is why I think the philosophy, the theology end of it is important. Like, I do see it is this good and evil are this inevitable co-presence, and I think I'm just saying, let's switch the spotlight to the dark side. Let's increase awareness of it, and maybe through increasing the awareness of it, we can try and manage. Organization, or the healthy organization, where this type of behavior, it will manifest itself, but hopefully not to excess.
I'm kind of thinking that we all agree and sort of blithely say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but so is evil. And the dark side. To me, that's sort of part of the choice dilemma that I'm hearing you say we need to raise for students, and I agree with that very much.
Okay, I'm just conscious of the time. We've run over. I'm going to be shut down now in 3 or 4 minutes. So to thank you again, if there's an interaction later on in the conference or in a belly through email, I'd love to strike up a kind of a good dialogue in a way. And I say I'm very happy to share the material, what I have and what others have contributed here, and hopefully we'll see where it goes.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Paul.